That lack of journalistic literacy really, I think, impacts our ability to push for a more equitable, more impactful journalism, whether it's community, legacy, whatever kind. And not having that journalistic literacy means we're not able to advocate for ourselves through our hyperlocal spaces and disrupt disinformation coming after our communities because we don't know how to access those spaces. So the problem has gone beyond just not knowing what journalism does and how it works. We need to know that so that we can actually advocate for ourselves against the media itself.
All right, folks, it is time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And some of you are a little bit concerned about the media. Are they going away? What's going on with the media? But I got other questions for you that I wanted to talk to you about today with media. What if journalism wasn't just about reporting the news, but a tool for social change, community power, and dismantling misinformation? I'm bringing on Dr. Cirien Saadeh to discuss a lot of these types of issues. She's a community organizer, educator, and founder of the Journalism of Color Training Center. She's faculty and department coordinator at Prescott College. And a lot of her focuses on the marginalized communities, reclaiming their narrative, storytelling. Obviously, if you're watching podcasts, you like storytelling. So how are you doing, Dr. Saadeh? Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. I love talking about disinformation, misinformation, media literacy, community literacy, community power, and I'm always grateful for the opportunity to do so.
You also hold a PhD in sustainability education.
Yes.
Let's start with that. What I think sustainability, I'm thinking more of the environment. I've never really put it in the context of education, but let's start with that.
Excellent. Well, so I actually received my PhD in sustainability education from Prescott. I graduated in 2019, and it is currently being run by a wonderful woman, M. Afalter. Dr. Afalter is phenomenal. We think of sustainability education. What we do is we invite educators, whether they K-12, higher ed, community educators, whatever type of teaching that people are integrated in, and we bring them in and we ask them to think about the crises of our time and the crises of our future with both an eye to sustainability, which is social, economic, and environmental, as well as an eye to social justice and the different forms of social justice. So we want our students to take on those issues and to think about the challenges that we face from both of those frameworks. I have been lucky enough to chair many or sit on committees and to chair committees over the last several years. One of my students recently graduated, actually just this May. She is a K-12 educator. She works at in a junior high and high school, and her work has been primarily with ELL students, English ESL students. You might know them kind of historically. And her work has been really around food and how do we create a sense of community empowerment, student empowerment for these students within the school community, but do so through food and through school lunches and through the cafeteria. And these students have been invited into this youth participatory action research project where they're getting to grow their own leadership skills, advocate for themselves, build a sense of accountability and empowerment in their school, but doing it through the classroom setting and the classroom and student clubs that she runs. And that was her PhD work. And she's been able to create this model and a teacher training model to help teachers at other schools approach similar problems with their own student communities. These are the things we did. For me, the journalism of color work, I'm an Arab American woman. And when I came to Prescott College, I was really challenged by this question of the broken media. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was seeing our mainstream, our legacy media fail our communities of color, our low-income communities, our queer communities over and over and over again. And I was working in community media, and I was concerned by two things. One, they had, I think, a framework for wanting to do things in community, but they didn't have a connection to the communities they wanted to serve by and large. And second, they didn't have the funding to be able to support that work. So they tried to do these efforts and they kind of inevitably shut down as funders turned to the next shiny object. And it unfortunately meant that trust had been fractured in many different ways with these communities that they were trying to reach, but didn't have any sort of natural connection to. And so a lot of my work came around how do we train people in our own communities to have the skills to do journalism, to challenge the narratives that are out there, to create, build a community literacy, a journalistic literacy, media literacy, but do so in such a way that we can actually build equity and build justice through the practice of journalism, make it one of the tools of organizers versus something that we think about. Because I think in the organizing work that I did for years, I know this because I did communications work. If, our big legacy paper didn't cover our event, the event was a failure.
Yeah.
But we knew if they covered our events that they were going to hurt our movements
Yeah.
power over their editorial space, and we shouldn't. We should have that editorial independence. But I still worry that our movements are too much dependent on legacy media and failing to understand that we have resources closer to the ground that we can invest in and they can invest in us.
All right. So what do you consider to be the biggest obstacles towards what you would like to see happen?
I think there is actually a twofold answer. I think for a long time I said my answer was a lack of journalistic literacy. This idea that we didn't understand community journalism, we didn't understand journalism as a whole. And so we were challenging journalism in ways that we actually should be supporting journalism. For example, we should want editorial independence. We do not want to be able to sway journalism to our side, because that means other people who don't have our best interests can also sway journalism in that way. We should want editorial independence. That lack of journalistic literacy really, I think, impacts our ability to push for a more equitable, more impactful journalism, whether it's community, legacy, whatever kind. In recent years, however, I think for me, it's been the disinformation space. Not just misinformation, but that intentional misinformation. That is the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And I'm seeing more and more, it comes from that journalistic literacy space, but it's more our communities are being targeted, I think, by disinformation actors. And not having that journalistic literacy means we're not able to advocate for ourselves through our hyperlocal spaces and disrupt disinformation coming after our communities, because we don't know how to access those spaces. So the problem has gone beyond just not knowing what journalism does and how it works to, oh, we need to know that so that we can actually advocate for ourselves against the media itself.
Yeah. All right. So when you're talking about our communities, you're referring to like marginalized communities.
Yes, I'm talking about, so I've been a community organizer since I don't actually know how many years now. I did my formal apprenticeship in 2010, but my first campaign was in 2005 when I was a high schooler. I have worked with student communities, low-income communities, Black and Brown communities, queer and trans communities, undocumented communities I've done every campaign from food justice, transit, media, small business, housing. I've worked numerous campaigns, and media justice campaigning is where I've spent the last 10 years in media justice organizing. But my roots are primarily in food and immigration organizing.
Good. I like to hear that. All right. So when you're talking about marginalized communities, there's a lot of marginalized communities, and these communities are, from what I understand, are there might not even be like a common denominator with, except for the fact that they're marginalized. So are you, in your efforts, able to find a common approach for the marginalized community?
Yeah. Well, I think the common approach is there isn't a common approach. I'm a community organizer by training. I was lucky enough to be apprenticed at the Organizing Apprenticeship Project. I had a mentor, Ned Moore, who's currently at the University of Minnesota Center for Urban and Regional Affairs Neighborhood Leadership and Organizing Project. I was lucky enough to be mentored by Ernesto Morales at Prescott College. I had organizers who taught me to be an organizer. And I have been an organizer who taught organizers. And what I teach and what I have been taught is our work has to be relational. So I never just do the work because I think I'm better than people or I know better. I go in, I have coffee with people, I sit down with them. I ask them about what their own work is like. I try and take an ecosystem approach of connecting different resources together. I try and think about the work not just as my work, but as our communal work. And I'm trying to figure out what my part of that work is like. I am somebody who, because I was trained in that relational kind of low intensity organizing, I'm not somebody who's necessarily at the front of a protest. That's never going to be my job as an organizer. That's just not the type of organizer I am. I'm an educator. I'm a storyteller. I'm a communicator. I'm somebody who's trying to help people own their own power and develop their own power and use that power. So I think the common approach is there isn't a common approach. You need to know people. I'm I'm not an academic who's going to work on a national or even statewide scale. That's just not where I'm effective. I know my place, St. Paul, Minneapolis. I work there. I'm moving to Prescott. I'm going to sit down for the first year and have coffee with as many people in the community as I can and keep having coffee with them. And I'm going to show up to their community meetings and I'm going to be present and I'm going to learn from them. And then at the end of that year, once I've got a better sense of what the community needs and what I might be able to help organize, I'll start responding from there. I think the common approach is, I think we want a common approach. I think a lot of organizers take a common approach. That's just not my method or my model.
Yeah. So when you talk about the community organizers, I do believe in the power numbers, and I hear that, you're really doing like a grassroots kind of approach. You're in this community that's, you don't, it almost sounds like you don't have a playbook. You're going to just reach out, gather information, and go from there. But,
Mhm.
to some degree, I am of the belief that power numbers at some level, do you have groups that you're associated with that, you can reach out to? Hey, I'm having trouble kind of getting this going here, and here's the group. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so right now I have those in Minnesota. Absolutely. I have them through the college. Prescott College has been a phenomenal resource. My students are working in different communities across the country, and because of them, I've been connected with dozens of organizations that I've been able to provide. I have the community journalism curriculum too, where I train people to be community journalists. I've been so lucky to have that support in Minnesota. I've worked with both community organizations as well as community journalism organizations. Ned Moore's organization at the University of Minnesota, I've worked really closely with them. Minnesota Women's Press, the Alley Streets MN, which is a transit and land use reporting organization. I work with both shared identity and shared geography communities, so I'm less concerned about everybody has the same identity. And I'm much more concerned with how do we have a shared um, sense of commitment to each other. Right. I I want to make sure I wasn't lost there because you were frozen for a second.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
So at Prescott College, are you your faculty and department coordinator there? Are you actually teaching students?
Oh,
And
yes.
and so how are they receptive to this? Are they fired up? Like, where are they?
Yeah, so I actually recently learned I'm a director, not coordinator. So there's been a title change as of this summer,
Okay.
which I'm super excited about. I direct two programs at the undergraduate, our Critical Social Justice and Solidarity program, and at the graduate level, our Online Organizing and Community Justice program. Both programs are community-based experiential programs. We're not just teaching our students about community organizing, particularly in the grad program. We are teaching them to be community organizers in their home community, in the community that they are part of. They are having one-to-ones. They're going to those community meetings. They're part of those community spaces, whether it's a school. About a third of my students are K-12 educators, community, mutual aid networks, wherever they might be. We are teaching students to be organizers primarily. At the undergrad level, it's about creating pathways for our students. Some of my students want to be organizers. Some of them want to go pre-law. Some of my students want to be researchers, journalists. We have students who are doing so many different projects. I am very lucky that Prescott has been, I'm beyond lucky. I think that understates it. I have been so very lucky that my college has invested so much into me as both a student and as a member of the faculty and now as an administrator. I am grateful that as an administrator, I still get to teach. I teach 6 classes a year, which for anybody who works in academia knows 6 classes a year plus directing 2 programs is an intense amount of work. We have had an institution that's put a lot of time into our work. We had our first ever on-campus residency conference last year. We'll be doing the second one this end of February, beginning of March. These are open to all. They're opportunities for people to come together and to be part of this shared space together. They're skill building conferences. They're opportunities for relationship building, for shared meals. I had come to my dean, Pavel Sinkel, this year with an idea after the residency that we should create a cookbook and distribute it to every member of our college community virtually, digitally, because we always say in the organizing work that all of our work starts at the shared kitchen table. All organizing starts around a shared meal. It starts at the kitchen table. My students know that I am apt to be bringing pizza or baked goods into class because I think if we're going to have hard conversations, I want to bring food to my in-person classes because I think they make it easier for us to have hard conversations.
Yeah.
And so I want to bring them into them. I so I told the dean, can I work on this cookbook and gather recipes from across the college? And we gathered recipes, and I spent all of June both developing other recipes and um, making all the recipes so I could take photos of them and then distributing all of the things I cooked to everybody I knew because it was too much food.
Yeah.
And we'll be publishing a 77 recipe cookbook in August because we think that, a shared meal is something that's to be honored. We have a tradition of shared meals at the college. Wednesday, community lunch. Friday, our sustainability club makes soup and bread. There's stone soup Sunday. We have a tradition of shared meals at our college, and it's just part of our story. But I've been really lucky. We're launching micro credentials at the college soon, and this fall I'll be beta testing 2 micro credentials, one in the foundations of community journalism, another one in disinformation, that people can take and get a micro credential certificate in both of these spaces. And my students are very much the momentum here. They both push me and are always wanting more, but they are also pushing the college for more. 2 years ago when my family is Jordanian and Palestinian, so 2 years ago in October 2023, as the genocide started occurring, I was really, really so grateful for my college, the college president, per, her support for the teach-in that my students organized, a 3-day 4-event teach-in. My students got to participate, they got to organize. Unlike other schools, we didn't have to worry about protests for divestment because we have been divested from weapons and defense manufacturers for many years now. It's part of our story. It's part of how we live what we talk about at the college. We're also divested from non-sustainable corporations. So it's part of our story. It's part of what we do. And our students pushed for that response. Our students continue to organize. They want more support for for a pre-law pathways. I've used some of the relationships I've been building to bring LSAT tutors to campus starting this year. They want a space for students to organize, so we've built a movement strategy center on campus through our Finance Center. They want to have a space to make zines that respond to issues in the community. So we've developed a zine library that will be launching in the fall. I'm really lucky to work at a school that we're not perfect. We're not supposed to be perfect. The work is supposed to be hard. And it is, I said, I think shows a lot of love shows a lot of love to me, and I'm grateful for them.
All right. So let's say you're a student out there or you're going into college and you're trying to make your future. And part of that is making money, being sustainable yourself, being independent. And let's say you're all fired up about the idea of becoming a community organizer. Can you make a living as a community organizer, or do you have to like attach that to I'm an educator, I'm a journalist, I'm a lawyer? How does that work?
No, most of the community organizers I know are careered. as community organizers. They work with nonprofits, they work with community organizations. That is their job. More and more of these organizations are trying very, very hard to practice what they preach and make sure that people are being paid a fair wage and that they get benefits and to become a millionaire off of. But I know all the organizers I know have their jobs and they're able to survive off of them and they're able to take care of other people. I think as because of the emotional intensity of organizing as you go through the field, we have more and more people who find their pathway. So I started as a field organizer. I was doing the media justice work, the food, the immigration justice work. I was doing political education work. I was doing political organizing. Um, and because of just the sheer emotional intensity of that work, I had to find a pathway that was still organizing, but that took me in just another kind of offshoot of that work where I'm still using all those skills as an organizer. I'm still organizing, but instead of that high intensity work at the front of the room, I am that low intensity organizer who's helping making sure everybody in that room has the skills they need and that we're building more sustainable and emotionally adept forms of organizing for the future so that our folks are not burning out as they enter the field. My students know that community care is a big part of what I talk about. But I've also learned a lot from them about community care. I had a student this year, Bash, in my graduate program. Um, he did a phenomenal capstone on mutual aid organizing in the American South and on skill building. And I just think that type of work is so crucial. Our students, but also I think just our young organizers now are not just asking us to do and teach better organizing, just generally in the field, not just at our institution, but they are expecting it. And they want us to do better in offering a more sustainable form of organizing. But yes, you can get a job as a community organizer. In fact, last year, as we did some program rebuilding and regeneration, I had looked at 100 job descriptions and coded 100 job descriptions into skills that my students were going to need to learn to get those jobs. And so I was looking at job titles along the way, community organizer, you might be a staff organizer, but again, as you go through the work, you're going to find your way in it. You could be a union organizer. There's lots of different ways to find your way here.
Gotcha. All right. So what media sources or organizations do you recommend for people looking to learn more about this?
About organizing work.
Yeah, and your mission.
Oh, yeah, I really love that question. Color Lines has done some good work. I am biased because as a journalist myself, I have written for many of the organizations that I love to talk about. I think it is important to read the news from our opponents. So which is organizing terminology. But I also spend a lot of time with the mainstream and legacy news each week because that's just part of what my work has to be. I have Feet in Two Worlds has done some really powerful reporting. Again, I'm biased because I've written for so many of them. Scalawag is incredible. In Minnesota, the Minnesota Women's Press is doing phenomenal work. I was lucky enough to work for an organization named North News, which is probably one of my favorite organizations I've ever had the chance to even connect with ever. The 19th is doing really phenomenal organizing. Documenters, which is out of, oh goodness, there's an organization in Chicago that I need to find the name of for you because it's a City Bureau, which is they actually are training people to and paying local folks they call documenters to report on public meetings and then distribute those notes to other news organizations. I love to go back to some of the old media. That gentleman I mentioned earlier, Ernesto Morales, has done a lot of work. He has a documentary, War of the Flea, that taught me so much about the Latin resistance movements. So I think for me, a lot of that work is relational. But again, because I'm a journalist, I am connected to many of these organizations. I love to read. There's the Chicago Defender is a favorite of mine. Many of these are not necessarily movement organizations. These are news organizations that are out of various marginalized communities. And because of the nature of organizing work, you are learning about the movements happening in these spaces versus specific movement. Now, some of them are Color Lines, for example, for sure, which is from Race Forward, formerly the Applied Research Center, I believe it was. These are organizations who are, including movements in the work because the community is doing this work and it's just part of the storytelling versus it being something that gets just touched on or that is the entirety of what they do. So you get a little bit more of a holistic thought because it's not just that I want to learn about, oh, the housing justice organizers are doing this work. I actually want to read and be like, what are the issues? So one of the things that I'll be doing when I move to Prescott is reading the Daily Courier, the local paper in Prescott, because I want to figure out what's happening in the community, what issues are people trying to respond to. That's going to tell me who's organizing, who are the people who are showing up to these meetings, and that's going to help inform both the questions that I ask of the community, but also the questions I ask about what's in the newspaper.
Okay, I want to leave on a positive note. I know that,
Yes.
in this space, it's sometimes it's hard to get there. And I really get upset about disinformation. I'm an environmental activist, and climate change is a hoax. Is just driving me crazy. So, give me a success story, a recent success story, in connection with what types of things you are not necessarily doing, but the types of community organization that we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to find this disconnected because I was part of this project, but I recently worked with the Alley Communications. They have a project, the Alley out of Phillips, which is the largest immigrant population in the state of Minnesota, and I believe one of the highest populations of BIPOC community folks just per capita. It's a very, very intensely kind of culturally significant community in Minnesota. And we worked with the neighborhood organization, one of four in the community, the Phillips West Neighborhood Organization. My organization and my work, we actually got some grant funding from the city. Um, and we were able to put together a year, I think it was a year or a year and a half long project to train community members to be community journalists and to help them publish stories in the alley. So we started with a series of one-off workshops where you would just go to one, you could kind of just get into it, see if you were interested. We had really wonderful participation in that project, and we were really excited to see people. We made so many connections. I ended up visiting a teacher's class at a local high school and was able to do some trainings. We built some really good connections, some partnerships that I could talk about in the future because we're still working through some of the details. But then we actually ended up turning it into a series over the course of 3 months with both local college students at St. Catherine University, as well as with folks in the community, training them to be community journalists. They went through the whole curriculum that I offer. I would say from pitch to proposal. So we had everything from fact checking and ethics to photography. They got to practice interviewing. They got to take photos. They really got to go through this entire process. And over the course of 2 issues, because the Alley is a monthly paper, we got to publish inserts in both from these writers. And it was really phenomenal to see and then assess with these students their experience and have all of them, whether they be from St. Kate's or from the community, talk about, I didn't know that's how journalism happened, and now I'm going to read the paper different. I really do think that's how one of the ways that we're going to help people build that literacy and then disrupt that disinformation space is if we teach them how it happens and how this process works. And that's why it's a slow process. It is slower than disinformation moves for sure. But if we work on that hyperlocal level, we're going to make that lasting change and a sustainable change to help people think about these things versus kind of an emotional impact that wears away over time.
Okay. Did I miss anything that you want to cover?
No, but I did want to just thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I love talking about this work, and I'm hopeful that anybody listens. Please feel free to reach out to me at Prescott. My email is easily available on the college website, and I'm also I think I'm on Threads, so you can find me online as well.
Well, don't underlook the power of social media to spur on a movement. So, all right.
Absolutely.
That'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. All your information is going to be in the show notes, how to reach out to you, how to connect with you on YouTube. Please share this episode because it's an inspirational thing. Media is important. Disinformation is bad. I don't know if there's a better word than I can use for bad. Dr. Cirien Saadeh, thank you for coming on. Community organizer, educator, and community trained journalist, dedicated to using journalism as a tool for social change. systems disruption, and movement building.
Love it.
All right, folks, you know what to do. Share, subscribe, rate, review. Anything, any comments you want to leave, go ahead to my YouTube channel, and that'll do it. Take care of yourself. So everybody stay safe. Don't give up hope. All right. Listen to this episode. That'll help you.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.